think Africa is an epitome of hope, of peace and prosperity. I think there's massive potential, in Africa itself as a continent that, apart from the challenges that have been faced by the people and by the continent, challenges of colonialism and challenges of natural disasters and all that, there is massive resilience in the whole continent of Africa and among the people of Africa themselves, because they have been able to withstand those challenges significantly. If you look at the large population of the continent itself, I think, millions of people in Africa, in fact, a quarter of the population in Africa are actually young people. And in that, you do have a lot of potential for development, potential for capacity development, and real development in Africa can only happen when you harness the local capacities and local institutions and strengthening capacities from within. And I think there has to be greater engagement with the young people. There has to be good development of good infrastructure. There has to be development of the economy and also strengthening political systems and political structures. And I think out of that, we're going to be seeing a lot more economic development coming out of that, making sure that we have effective economic systems that can ensure that there is sustainable development of the continent itself. So I suppose the strength of Africa is largely in its people, of which we have a young population, and it is out of that that we're going to get more sustainable development. The historical links between Africa and Ireland go a long way back, with Irish missionaries coming over to Ireland, to Africa to share the gospel, but also even in my own country, in Zimbabwe, we used to have Irish teachers coming from here with exchange programs between Africa and Ireland, basically. But also we also share kind of a common colonial credentials, where also Ireland, like most African countries, would have been colonized and all that. And I think there we can share, there's a shared sense of community, shared sense of family, and I think those true values that are at the core of our societies, once we share them and to enhance businesses and support one another, I think that would be quite important. And Ireland, considering the challenges that it has faced in the recent times in terms of economic recession that has usually hit on families and incomes at household level, I really do think that Ireland can extend its economic power into Africa and develop those economic links with Africa, and be able to be strong relations and business opportunities that can actually work to develop Ireland as well as Africa itself. So I do see a lot of opportunities there for cooperation, economic cooperation, but also I think Africa can learn a lot from how Ireland has been managed in its tough times. If you look at how, from a dire economic recession in 2008, 2009, if you look at where we are now, we're beginning to see, growth and development in Ireland. And I think, and that's down to the political system that is quite relatively democratic. And I think we can learn a lot as well in Africa. So I think there's a lot to learn politically and economically as well between the two Ireland and African countries. There's absolutely no doubt that because of the potential that I've already talked about in Africa, there's no doubt that Africa is a growing economy. It is a massively rising economic power. And if you look at China and how China is penetrating Africa in terms of infrastructure development, but also in terms of the economic ties, and if you look at countries like Botswana, Zimbabwe, and and Angola, Nigeria, and if you look at the oil and all the natural resources that are in those countries, we do have massive potential, and there's enough resources in Africa to look after not only Africans in the continent, but also globally. But I suppose the challenge there is the governance systems and governance structures, and I think once there is concerted efforts at SADC level and AU level, with the support of international community and in cooperation with AU, I really strongly believe that Africa can be back on its track. And I think even some of the health challenges that we are seeing, we are going to be seeing, strengthening of the systems, social systems, health systems, once we have good governance structures and all that. The other huge challenge also in terms of cooperation between Europe and Africa is also to do with tax justice. And there's a lot of international aid that is going over to Africa from EU, but also there's a lot of money and billions of money that are actually coming out of Africa, through tax dodging and all those things. And I think once, the revenue structures are strengthened, and once tax justice is effected in Africa, but also here in Europe, where international companies are not necessarily, dodging taxes and evading paying taxes in Africa, I think we're going to see member states of Africa actually being able to collect revenues that can actually strengthen the national systems in terms of health, social systems, and education, and all that. I really do think that there's a lot of scope there, and I think there's a lot of potential for there to be development in going forward. For as long as there's political will, I really do see that happening. And I think we're beginning to see even a new generation of politicians in Africa. If you look at the changes in Malawi, changes in Zambia, Kenya somehow, but I really do think that there is potential for redevelopment of Africa and re-energizing of political systems in Africa. So I've got a lot of hope for it. For me, is really powerful because she's rubber stamping, and she's already saying something that we already are aware of. We already know that there's riches, there's resources, there's potential, and there is the energy, the necessary energy that is needed to reinvigorate the resources and the economies of Africa itself. So for Hillary Clinton to actually say that, it's great to see that there's acknowledgement at that level. I really wish if there could greater regulation. I wish there could be greater accountability at the various regional mechanisms in terms of AU and SADC, and I think there has to be multiple strategies and engagement with Africa. I don't think the whole idea, especially obviously that's the mandate of the media, to kind of paint Africa bad and to stereotype Africa as being very negative and as being infested with diseases and all that is going to really help. But I think there has to be greater strategic engagement with Africa by America, by the UN Security Council, by the various mechanisms that I've already talked about. And it's great to see that Hillary Clinton is actually rubber stamping what we already know about. So there has to be greater also involvement of Africa, not just South Africa. If you look at G8, for example, there's only fewer countries, but I think there's more potential that we're not putting to the fore, that we're not putting to the radar screen of the international community that we need to see in other countries, So I really do think that there's greater cooperation that we need to see internationally. My hope for the future of Africa is to see development, economic development, but also capacity development of the young people. I think we do have massive opportunity among the young people that we have in Africa, in rural areas as well as in urban areas. And I think all that will come about when we see the regeneration of and also redevelopment of the governance systems and governance structures. Unless there's political will at country level, if you look at any African country, it is within the power of the government, the sovereign government or sovereign state, to ensure that the civil society is energized and is included and capacity developed, and to make sure that we also engage and strengthen the local mechanisms and local institutions to ensure that there's more accountability, there's more transparency, and there's more inclusion of the voices in decision making. And out of that, we will see development of better policies that are pro-poor, that can help in enhancement and development of the capacities of young people, and also development of infrastructure that will attract foreign direct investment and ensure that there is more income coming in, and also to ensure that there's greater involvement of international companies coming to our countries when they know that we are democratic countries, we have good and great infrastructure. Unless that happens, it will be very difficult for us to be able to attract foreign direct investment in terms of going forward. And also health systems. I'm an international aid worker myself, and having traveled to so many countries, health systems are at the core of development. With a sick nation, sick society, it will be difficult for you to avail much in terms of economic development. And there will be need to strengthen health systems as well as social systems if we are going to be able to see development economically of our countries. And I think there is scope for greater cooperation and coordination with the international community in those areas. The solution is not in international aid. I understand aid in the sense of, humanitarian situations like disasters, like what we saw in earthquakes and stuff like that. But I think there has to be more strategic ways of engaging Africa, not just to see them as a depository of the leftovers from Europe, but actually to see them as a resource, and also to see them as a market, and how to strategically engage with Africa as a market. So there has to be a whole paradigm shift in relation to how international community is engaging with Africa, but also for Africa and African governments and African people themselves to be able to transform their own paradigms in terms of how they perceive themselves and the potentials that they have in themselves in terms of young people, and in terms of the systems and structures that are in place already. And there's also importance of the regional mechanisms to be changed, transformed, and for them to be regenerated to a point where they are responsive to the needs of the countries that they represent. Otherwise, there's no point in having regional mechanisms that don't have any impetus to change the way they do things, basically. So I think there has to be a multi-level response and multi-level changes in structures.